Okay, for the sake of everybody's time, I'm going to get us started and people might be joining. I do want to say that this is going to be a fairly informal panel. So if at any point you want to jump in, at least when I'm talking, you can. We're going to have some time at Q&A at the end, but if you would throw things in the chat, we can kind of gather those and talk about it at the end and have a good conversation. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. And I just want to talk to you a little bit before we get started about what this Diverse Voices panel was created for. So this was created by the AAEA Mentorship Committee in 2020 with the goal to learn about members' experiences, all the diverse experiences, career paths, backgrounds, and experiences we each have had throughout our time as academics or non-academics. We recognize that the AAEA has such a broad membership that we wanted to be able to highlight those different experiences. So a primary goal that we have is to learn about how different experiences or forces have shaped members' careers that might not be part of their CV or resume, or fill in those gaps. Like they landed in this position, tell us about it. Or what things along the way did they learn or experiences they had that other members might benefit from knowing about or learning from. So our panel today is going to have 3 AAE members from non-land grant institutions with career paths or position expectations that may differ from a traditional, we'll call it R1 academic position. And so we gathered together some people who have some shared kind of background, and they can talk even within that shared kind of background, how they differ in important ways. I do want to share with everybody that we have had a number of these webinars over the years, and they are available on the AAEA YouTube webpage. We'll put a link into the chat, and we encourage you to go back and listen to these diverse perspectives from over time and share those with anybody else you think might benefit from them. And this recording will be provided as part of that moving forward. So I'm going to get started today with our first panelist. So Amelia Finaret is going to talk with us first, and she's an associate professor teaching in the Department of Global Health with a secondary appointment in the Business and Economics Department. She is also an honorary lecturer for the University of Edinburgh's Global Academy of Agricultural and Food Systems and a practicing clinical dietitian. How do you say to pronounce that, Finaret?
Titusville.
Oh, okay.
Titusville.
Okay, Titusville. Amelia holds graduate degrees in agricultural and food economics and PhD in nutrition from Tufts University and is a registered dietitian nutritionist. So Amelia, please share your experiences with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me as well. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So can you all see that in a slideshow, hopefully? Great. Okay. So I'm going to start from the beginning, where really I think that my interest in food started when I was a kid, not because I didn't want to eat certain things, but because I really didn't want to be told what to eat. And I remember this feeling very clearly of being confused about how do you know that that's good for me? How do you know that this is what I should be doing? And at least when I was that age, kind of, that's not me. That's just, that's a picture I grabbed from the web. But feeling like, okay, well, how do we know all of this that you're saying? And I don't really necessarily believe you. So to learn more, the first thing I did after graduating high school was I went to go work on a farm. And I worked there for 2 seasons on a small vegetable farm. This particular farm is in Framingham, Massachusetts, and I really just wanted to learn all I could about growing food. And I was still interested in what food does in your body, but at this point I was much more focused on the food growing part, and I learned a lot there. So over the time that I was doing this, I really kind of grew to learn that food choice is definitely not like this, like what this picture is representing. It's not donut versus apple, but I didn't really know why food choice wasn't like that. And I wanted to learn more. So when I finally went to college, which ended up being 2 years later than my parents wanted, because again, I was on the farm, I knew then that econ was the study of choices. And this is probably the result of some very strategic Googling and figuring out definitions of things. And then I also had figured out that to learn econ, I really needed to learn math. And so that's how I started my academic training. I was at Stony Brook University on Long Island, and I studied applied math and statistics, and I had a double major in econ. And I really started to feel comfortable with more of my quantitative skills and understanding here's what we know, here's how we know it. And then also here's how we know that we don't know, that we can't know certain things, right? And that uncertainty, which was very helpful to clarify a lot. So then, because of my interest in food and understanding choices around food, I went to Iowa State for my master's degree. This is where I studied ag econ and met Alicia, of course, while she was a PhD student there. And this was really great. I really was able to solidify a lot of my training in economics and to get guidance from a lot of the wonderful faculty there and other grad students as well. And then after my master's degree, there was really a choice between kind of continuing in ag econ or doing something else. I ended up doing something else because I was very interested in how food acts and interacts with other food in the body. And so I ended up going to Tufts for my PhD in nutrition and food economics. And that's at the Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. Later on, I then went back to finish for my registered dietitian credential as well, to kind of round out, so to really try to understand food from production and then to how it's acting in the body. So through all this training, I really was always interested in and always motivated by these connections between agriculture, nutrition, and health. This is always sort of what's been in the back of my mind because, of course, what affects our bodies affects what we can do. What we can do on the farm affects our bodies as well. And such a huge proportion of the world's poor are working farmers. And I think that nutritional concerns in that population are really, really important to understand and to address from a policy perspective. So this is sort of, in all my training, this is sort of what I was focused on, is this intersection. These are some of the books that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with all of these books that you know, really shaped a lot of my thinking and a lot of my interests. You know, Fogel writes a lot about physiology and the science of how food turns into energy for us. And so all of these were really, really important for my training and my thinking. So what happened after Tufts, so I graduated from Tufts in 2015 with my PhD. I worked under Will, and we still work together today, which is really great. And I applied to lots of different jobs. And one of them was this interdisciplinary program at a small liberal arts college in rural Pennsylvania. So Allegheny is a college, it was a college of about 2,000 students when I started teaching here in 2015. Now it's about 1,300 students. And the global health program here started with an HHMI grant. So they saw my training and my publication record, and they were like, oh, so she seems kind of interdisciplinary. That's what we want. So that's specifically what they were looking for. And also someone who had some training in health, science, physiology, medicine, nutrition. That's the other thing they were looking for. So Meadville is really a wonderful place. I've described some pros here, and those of you who live in small college towns also will concur with these. I teach small classes, which is really wonderful. I get to know my students over the course of years, which is very special. There's no traffic, which is also very special. It's very walkable. I can really walk anywhere in town, which is helpful because we're a one-car family, and my husband and I do have lots of responsibilities around town. And it's really a wonderful community. There are definitely a few cons, and we were talking about this a little bit when before the webinar started. I definitely live very far from my family, which is a challenge sometimes. Far from any major city. We're about an hour and 40 minutes from Pittsburgh, about 2 hours from Cleveland, about 2 hours from Buffalo. And then the last kind of drawback is that I'm not really able to do as much research as I want, but of course I can't do everything, and I have to keep telling myself that I can't do everything. But overall, I try to do a little bit of everything that I really enjoy. I really do love teaching. I teach 6 classes a year, and I also advise undergraduate research projects. I do research mostly related to data, so I look at data quality and data errors for large-scale household surveys and other types of dietary intake data, and I do that with the Global Academy of Agriculture and Food Systems. And then I also see patients at Titusville Hospital. It's a very small critical access hospital. There's only 25 inpatient beds, but and I see some of those inpatients as well as if they have feeding issues. But I also see the outpatients for nutrition counseling. So whenever I'm doing one of these things, I try to just focus on that one thing. And then I move to the next thing, because of course, multitasking doesn't work, right? We can't multitask. We have to just do one thing at a time. So I try to do that, but I do try to fit in a little bit of each to my regular weeks because I really do enjoy all of them and I can't choose between them. So lessons that I've learned so far from what I've been working on, one is to not be afraid of interdisciplinary work. And I think a lot of us might be because it's maybe seen as squishier. But the role of an applied economist in interdisciplinary work is often possibly to bring that empirical rigor, and that's what you all have a comparative advantage in. So that shouldn't get lost in the shuffle if you're on the team. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. So go do it. Collaboration is challenging, but can also be very fun and very productive. Remember to keep being inspired by your students. And I think that's hard, especially if you're in a research position and you don't interact with students often enough to really get to those relationships that, last for years. But they can have short-term impact as well. And students are amazing, but they're tired too, and they're anxious. And, I think one thing to keep everything in its proper containers for me is that students appreciate boundaries. They appreciate deadlines, and knowing what to expect from you in terms of that is going to be helpful for them and for you in your schedule. Another one that I think is particularly good for applied economists is to always be skeptical. And this is something that applied economists, I think, are great at. And especially maybe when we're talking about things related to health and nutrition, because you'll hear these claims and the applied economist is going to be maybe more likely than others to say, how do we know that, right? Where's the data? What's the information? Where are you pulling that from? Can we say this in a causal way, right? All those really important questions we like to ask those questions, and it's very important that those questions are asked. And this is what leads to really good research questions too. And then the last thing is, if you're kind of in one silo of your working life and it's starting to drive you a little nuts, then just switch to the next one. Don't try to do both at once, of course, because that doesn't work, but just switch or take a break. Taking a break is very important too. So the last thing I wanted to bring up was our textbook, and Will's here in the call too. So this was the biggest project that I've worked on ever, and it of course took many years. We're so excited about it. It's open access. It will teach all about food to economists who don't know about food. It will teach econ to people who are interested in food and don't know anything about econ. We cover everything from soup to nuts in the food economy, including data, including all kinds of theoretical models as well. So yeah, and Will and I are putting together the website, which will have slides, assignments, exams, everything. If anyone has questions about this, I'd be happy to answer them, or probably Will also can do that too. So thank you so much for having me, and I'd be happy to take your questions later on.
Thank you, Amelia. I'm going to jump to our next presenter. I'll start by introducing him. So our next presenter is Michée Lachaud, who earned his PhD in Agricultural and Resource Economics from the University of Connecticut and is currently an associate professor in the agribusiness program at Florida A&M. He has served as a consultant on various projects related to agricultural productivity, climate change, and impact evaluation for several international organizations, including the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and the International Labor Organization. Dr. Lachaud currently serves as chair-elect of the Committee on the Opportunities and Status of Blacks in Agricultural Economics, which is a section of the AAEA. Something we encourage everybody to do is look at all the sections that are offered and consider joining and supporting those. So Dr. Lachaud, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to stop sharing and let you share your story.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Alicia and AAEA for inviting me to share my story. I'm from Haiti, which is a small and very poor country in the Caribbean. Needless to say, it was a difficult journey to pursue my studies. I was lucky, and thank you to my parents who believe in education and keep motivating me and my siblings to focus on our studies. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old when I decided that I would obtain a PhD and become a professor after reading about PhDs in a French comic book. I mean, Haiti was colonized by France. That day, I said to myself, I don't know what a PhD is, but whatever it is, I'm going to get one. I was just fascinated by the idea. These were the dreams of a young kid, of course, many of which goes unrealized, especially for children from developing countries like me. I studied statistics in Haiti, and often there are some advanced statistics classes. We have to bring professors from France or United States or somewhere else to teach them because we do not have the expertise. So when I was in my last year in college, they brought a professor from the Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, and he facilitated 4 of us who were among those who got the highest grades to get a scholarship to pursue a joint master degree in environmental and resource economics at the Universidad de los Andes and the University of Maryland College Park. I'm from Haiti, so whatever the scholarship I received, I would have accepted. And of course, over time, I love our field. That was in 2004. And I graduated in 2006 and went back to Haiti. In 2009, I applied for the Fulbright scholarship for my PhD studies, and I was fortunate enough to obtain the scholarship. I went to the University of Connecticut, and I graduated in 2014. It was not easy for me after I graduated to find a job because as a Fulbright scholar, I was on a J1 visa, which requires me to return home for 2 years. And the situation at home was not ideal, especially in terms of safety. And not all institutions would hire someone with a J1 visa. So I work a bit as a consultant for the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and also for the UN on different projects related to agricultural productivity, climate change, and impact evaluation. And later on in 2017, I joined Florida A&M University, known as FAMU, where I'm currently an associate professor in agribusiness. At Florida A&M University, we have a small but a very productive agribusiness program. I learned early on that in order to sustain our graduate program there, I need to write grants to bring graduate students. I did not receive much advice on grants when I started. My first proposal was rejected, and the reviewers agreed it was a great and innovative idea, but not a proposal. So getting grants may not be a top priority for tenure and promotion of young faculty, but all departments appreciate and respect faculty who can bring funding in because it helps to finance graduate students. It also increases the visibility of the program and also can pay our way through the summer. As most of us, we are on a 9-month contract. Obtaining grants is quite a competitive process, as you all know, but we can learn from experts, and this is what I did, but this is what I've been doing. To learn how to write proposal, and I'm still learning and I still have a lot to learn. I decided to serve as a panel reviewer for several funding agencies, USDA, NOAA, NSF. I have learned many tips and tricks from grant writing experts, including the reason that although my first attempt was a good idea, but the reviewers did not consider it as a proposal. I do know that tenure earning faculty, I often advise not to serve as grant reviewers because it is time consuming. This is true, but my experience showed me the benefit outweighed the cost. I got lucky. I secured a few grants with USDA, NIFA, ERS, FAS, NSF, and with some international organization before getting my tenure. And currently, I also serve as a panel manager for USDA NIFA. And I believe also serving as a grant reviewer is also a good opportunity to expand your professional network. I'm gonna talk just a bit about my mentorship. During my PhD studies, I was fortunate to work with Dr. Boris Bravo later at UConn, who has been a mentor, and we later have become colleagues and good friends. I've learned a lot from him, especially about professionalism, consulting, and especially writing. English is my fourth language. And I remember he sat with me and spent hours to teach me about writing and editing. He would later send me his own manuscript to get feedback from me. And he would return it back to me to go over it again and say, Michée, please be tough on me. He trusted me and also valued my comments and suggestions. So what I have learned from that is what we need when we just started our career is a senior faculty member who is genuine, and the word genuine is important here, who is willing to serve as a mentor, someone who will provide constructive criticism and also interested in both your personal and professional growth. I've also learned from my mentors when and also how to say a firm and polite no to colleagues. You need to learn how to say no sometimes. Back at UConn also, I also briefly worked with Dr. Stephen Swallow, and after my first PhD presentation, though he was not my advisor, not only wanted to make sure he attended my presentation, but the next day he sent me a very long email about what was wrong and good with my presentation and what I should do to improve not only the content, but my way of making presentations. Immediately, I could see the difference between an advisor and a mentor. It's good to seek mentors outside of our institutions, and especially from a leading association in our field such as AAEA. I was also fortunate to meet Dr. Christopher Davis from USDA ERS, who invited me to participate in the Early Career Professional Papers competition organized by the Committee on Opportunities and Status of Blacks in Agricultural Economics, COSB, in 2019, which is a section of AAEA. I was lucky enough to receive the first outstanding and professional award of the competition. He later served as a mentor for me and constantly checked on my personal and professional growth. This is how I renewed my relationship with AAEA. And also I've grown my professional network, which is an excellent thing to do. Later, I served as the secretary of COSB AAEA for 2 years, and I'm currently COSB chair. And I also serve on AAEA membership. I had good mentors, and I've treated my students the same way they treated me. The last word I would say is what I have learned over the years. It is all about passion, dedication, hard work, time management, life balance, and also good mentorship. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Michée. I'm gonna reshare my screen now. We'll get to our last presenter. Okay, so our third presenter today is Dr. Richard Gallenstein, who received his PhD in Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics from The Ohio State University in 2017. In that same year, he joined the faculty of the Department of Economics at Catholic University of America, where he has continued to work since. He is now an associate professor and the director of CUA's Master of Public Policy program. Richard specializes in development economics and behavioral economics. His research includes work on microfinance, microinsurance, and the behavioral implications of economic inequality. So Richard, please share with us your story.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Amelia and Michée, for your presentation so far. I've really enjoyed hearing about your journeys. So yes, I am an associate professor of economics today, but I'm going to start my kind of story all the way back in 2006 when I enrolled in undergrad. So I did my undergraduate degrees at Ohio State University as well. And when I went into undergrad, I went in with a bachelor's or with a major in molecular genetics. Because when I came out of high school and when I went into college, what I really wanted to do was bench laboratory research. And I wanted to work on, genetically modifying organisms to solve major biological problems. I was a full-on biology minded guy. And so in undergrad, I did 5 years of undergrad. 4 of those years I spent doing bench laboratory research in molecular genetics. And a lot of it was plant molecular genetics. In fact, my first academic publication is actually in molecular biology. But during those 5 years of undergrad, I made a big kind of field and career shift because, as you know, I'm an economist today. So how did that come about? And I always like telling that I studied molecular genetics. My students always find that really interesting. Like, well, how are you an economist? How are those connected? So a couple of parts of my story from undergrad. So one was while I was studying biology, one project that I was working on was genetically modifying crops to fight malnutrition in sub-Saharan Africa. And so I was on a project working on crop modification genetically. And it was a really interesting project, but along the way, I started to come to the conclusion that some of the economic, culture, and political factors were bigger barriers to fighting malnutrition in sub-Saharan Africa than the genetic modification that I was working on in undergrad. And Amelia, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that sometime. And so I started to wonder if maybe a different route would be better. Also, when I went into undergrad, I didn't really know much about economic development or the challenges in less developed countries. But as I was going through undergrad, I actually went through a religious transformation. I became Catholic, and in that process, I really became convicted that I wanted my work to think carefully about and to address issues of poverty and destitution. And so I started to dig into that more. I said, well, let me study that. So I took some classes in economics and development economics, and I met some really good mentors in that process who were in the agricultural, environmental, and development economics program at Ohio State. And so I began to meet with the professors and some PhD students, kind of learned what life would be like as an econ PhD or applied econ PhD. And I was really captivated by that. And so right at the end of undergrad, I added a bunch of econ courses to fill in the prerequisites. And I applied to a PhD program in that department at Ohio State, and I got accepted. And so I made this big pivot right at the end of undergrad. I ended up deferring for a year so that I could spend some time with family. And so I deferred for a year, but then I enrolled in the PhD program in 2012. And my thought at first was that I would bridge together my undergraduate work in molecular genetics and development economics, which I was now studying in graduate school. I had an opportunity in 2013 to travel to Tanzania and work with one of those faculty members who had inspired me as an undergrad in Tanzania. And so we started writing a paper on the role of genetically modified crops in fighting malnutrition. But over the course of the first several years of my PhD program, more opportunities opened up for me in terms of studying microfinance, microinsurance, than opened up for me to kind of study genetically modified crops and their impacts. And so I had this interesting choice where, you know, I had to decide, am I going to keep building on what I studied in undergrad, or am I going to pivot towards something that is in that development economics space, but where there are more opportunities for me? Some of the faculty members in my program had won a couple of grants on this topic, and I had the opportunity to join that team. And so I decided to pivot and join that team. I ultimately got to work on a randomized controlled trial in Ghana. And then I got to go back to Tanzania to do a couple of lab in the field experiments, again, related to microfinance and microinsurance. And so I pivoted away from my background completely and started to work in microfinance. I did 5 years of the PhD. While I was in the PhD program on these projects, I made 6 trips to sub-Saharan Africa, divided between Ghana and Tanzania. Spent about 9 months there, divided across those trips. And I had such a magnificent experience in graduate school with my advisors, with those projects, with those trips. And I've never looked back. I've really appreciated every step of that journey from undergrad through grad school, kind of the accumulating, you know, different ideas, different perspectives, but then, you know, running as quickly as I can, you know, down those roads of opportunity that were, you know, afforded to me in graduate school. So yeah, I had these fantastic trips, got to dig into those fields, build the skill sets, you know, experimental skill sets in development economics. And also, to be honest, I mean, probably the most valuable part of those experiences in graduate school is the building of the relationships. You know, I made lifelong friendships in graduate school, both with my colleagues and my advisors, but then also the friends that I made in Ghana and in Tanzania. I have regular phone calls with my friends from Ghana and Tanzania from those projects that I got to work on, the friends that I made working on those projects. So graduate school was a fantastic experience. I graduated in 2017, went on the job market. Even though I loved everything that I was working on, my goal, my professional goal in graduate school was I wanted to work in the private sector. Really, for me, my priority is I wanted to stay near home, and I loved the community that I was a part of in graduate school, and I wanted to stay in Ohio. But I went on the job market and I looked for academic jobs, and I restricted it. I looked only for jobs that were in a close vicinity around the cities that I wanted to be in Cincinnati and Columbus, Ohio. But there was a couple of places that stood out to me that I was willing to at least submit an application on that were outside of my 150-mile radius. And one of those was Catholic University of America, because, well, you know, I became Catholic in undergrad, very passionate about my faith, and that's why I was attracted to, you know, a faith-based institution. They were hiring for a development economist that had experience with impact evaluation. And so I really resonated with what they were doing in the econ department, and my skill set really fit what they were looking for. And so I applied, even though I really wanted to stay in Ohio. And so this was a complicated process when I was on the job market, trying to decide between different interests. So I went through the process, ultimately got an offer, and then it came down to a really hard decision, one of the hardest decisions that I've made. But I decided to accept the position. And so I moved to Washington, D.C., which was a giant mystery for me. And I didn't go into the private sector. I went into academia. At the time, I don't think I'd quite caught the research bug, and so I was a little intimidated. We're an R2 institution. We're small. We're about 5,000 students, but we take research pretty seriously. There's pretty high demand for research on the tenure process, so I was very intimidated for what I would have to accomplish in the research side. And so I was very nervous going into my position. But once I got here, about 3 months in, I realized that I was in a place that fit me like a glove, and I have just loved it ever since. I caught the research bug going through the tenure process, and I have loved the research. I've continued what I worked on in graduate school. I've had a couple other projects. I've kind of expanded my portfolio a little bit. I worked for 5 hard, nose to the grindstone years towards tenure. I had a teaching load that worked its way up to a 2-3, and then also needed to publish quite a few papers. And so it was a grind for the first 5 years here. But last year I was offered tenure, and so now I'm an associate professor. And I thought, hey, this is great. I have tenure now. I'll be able to relax. Now I'll be able to just focus on my research. This will be so great. And as soon as I got tenure, I was immediately offered the position of director of a new master's program. And so I have never been busier than since I got tenure. And so it's been a wild ride, and I'm tired, but I love everything that I do, the teaching, the research. My wife and I live on campus, and so we're really engaged in campus life with students and hosting events. Attending student events. This weekend, I was in a foosball tournament. My team we were in the semifinals. So we love to be involved in campus life. We love it here. It's a beautiful place. We miss Ohio, so we might go back someday. Our family's all there. My wife and my family's there. But we love it here. And so thank you so much. Appreciate it. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Richard. Thank all of our panelists for their awesome background stories and sharing us their experiences. Now we have time for Q&A. So if anybody wants to jump into the chat, throw a question, jump onto the screen if they're bold enough to do that. I can start with one to get things going. Honestly, you guys stole my first one. I didn't know what you were going to talk about. And so I was going to ask about pivots, but you guys all covered that. You had lots of pivots in your career. And so my first question is going to be, you've had lots of pivots and experiences, diverse interactions with different interdisciplinary work. How has this shaped your teaching and or research and how you approach that work on a day-to-day basis? Anybody can jump in.
I can jump in first if you don't mind. So my background in biology really influenced at least the initial part of my academic, my PhD life. The first paper that I worked on in grad school was related to genetically modified crops. Although again, I eventually pivoted and I never published that paper. The next kind of interdisciplinary thing has actually been recent. So I'm the director of a Master's of Public Policy program. And most of the people that I work with on that program are political scientists and philosophers. And so now I've been engaging with the philosophy of economic and political thought, and I'm co-teaching a class right now that involves all 3 fields. It's called Public Policy for the Common Good. And so I've had to brush up on my kind of political economy, philosophy, political theory, to try to be able to hold this class together. And it's been a magnificent experience working in that kind of interdisciplinary space, networking, advising students from an interdisciplinary perspective, kind of knowing when I can speak to something and when I need to connect a student to an expert in that field has been an interesting thing to build, and also collecting a lot of reading suggestions from my colleagues, so reading a lot of books on other subjects to kind of build out a more well-rounded portfolio. But it's been a fantastic and incredibly intellectually stimulating experience. So I highly recommend it.
I don't know if this is a new concept, but I I learned about this concept, convergence research, which is, to me, it's a new trend. I got a grant from NSF to work with scientists from NCAR. NCAR is the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And it was interesting as a social scientist. I have to work with scientists from NCAR, and they are like physicists, climatologists, atmospheric scientists. And we spent almost the first 3 to 6 months talking, discussing about research and about modeling until we realized we're not talking about the same thing. You know, the same terminology, but two different things, you know? And we had to back up to say, okay, what's going on, you know? And the idea of convergence research which has for objective, like, they want to be like actionable science, like whatever research we are doing, this research should reach the end users. Okay, in my case, I'm doing something related to climate change adaptation, working with farmers, you know. But I'm not sure this is the difference between interdisciplinary and convergence research, but what we emphasize, and I found it fascinating, is no discipline should have a better weight compared to the other one, you know? And the experience was good because at the beginning, this is a program they call NCAR Innovator Program. And of course, we have made progress over time, but the idea was to work with those scientists as social scientists. But at the beginning, a lot of us, we realized it's like we need to learn on the side. You know, it's like we need to try to converge to what they are doing to understand the science instead of them understanding what we are doing as a social scientists, you know? And it took us time to realize, no, this is not what convergence research is about, you know? So they have to learn about you, and you need to learn about that, about them, and just to combine to get a better outcome that will be useful for the society in general. So yeah, this is what I would say, yeah. But it has been an interesting experience, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess there's two things that this brings to mind. One is that being at the small liberal arts college where I teach, I am one of only two food econ or ag econ trained people. So there's we have one member of AAEA who's in our econ department, and she does some great work on school lunches and nutrition economics. But I'm also the only nutrition person on campus besides her. She does some nutrition in her work, but it's econ. There's no nutrition science really. So I feel very lonely sometimes in my own institution, which is bad, but it's good in the sense that it really has made me go out of my comfort zone in terms of reaching out to others. So and in terms of trying to make connections, like right now I'm chair of the FSN section, and I probably would not have done that if I had a community of ag economists nearby. And I'm really glad though that I did it. And it's a great experience to do that. And working on certain projects, I'm working on a data linkages project with an amazing team who I just would not have really gotten connected with if I wasn't trying to reach out of my comfort zone because I didn't have anyone around. So there's that happens. And then I also find myself sometimes translating between like the health science side and the social science people. So an economist will say, oh, well, that's optimal. And I'll have to say, okay, well, what they mean by that, like, obviously this is terrible. What they mean by optimal is this. Or the health science, person says something and the economist is like, what does that mean? And so I translate that. And so I try to be a translator when I can, and that can, I think, be helpful for students, especially if they see it happening in real time. So I do have the opportunity to team teach sometimes, and we usually have people team teach from very different backgrounds. And so so that is when the students can see that happening in real time. Like, wait, what do you mean? Oh, I mean that. Oh, that's not what I was talking about. Okay, so what are we talking about? And then I often will say, like Richard was saying, I'll say in class, like, okay, well, I don't know the answer to that. We have to ask this person. That happens all the time. So.
Thank you. Will, you turned on your video. I don't want to assume that means you have a question, but do you have one?
Oh, yeah. Just first of all, really appreciate the conversation, and did want to turn on the video just to be part of conversation. But like the main thing that comes to my mind is just to ask Michée about language. Like it segues a little bit from this different languages of different disciplines. When we think about the diverse voices of the AAEA, like a lot of people grew up speaking other languages and switching back and forth. In my case, I grew up switching back and forth between English and French, going to France. And I did get to, spend a college semester in Haiti, but I don't know Haiti very well. But I did feel like I was reinventing myself with every new language. Like when I would switch, and then I did Spanish also, and I was like a different person. And I'm just curious about that switching process for you, Michée, and like coming into the world of ag econ, like if you can say anything at all about living life in multiple languages. Because I think that just like learning how to think about that for other people is really hard, because we only speak one, or at any one time, we're only speaking one. It's kind of, I don't know, I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts about, you said you spoke 4 languages.
Yeah, I mean, when I left Haiti to go to Colombia, I did not know Spanish, and I was lucky enough. The first semester we had 3 courses. I remember it was statistics, math, and environmental economics. So stat and math, that were good, because the professor realized immediately I know what I'm talking about, even though I cannot express it. It was very challenging. And when I was talking, nobody would understand, but he knows I know what I'm talking about. It will just give me the marker to go on the board, So stat, math, first semester, good. Environmental economics, that was tough because it required a lot of reading and to write papers. That was the only difficult class, But after 6 months, I work hard, I learned the language, After a year, I was good, And so I got the Spanish part. So it was okay. And at the same time, I was learning the Spanish with, I'm also a musician. I was doing a double major. I did not mention that, okay? I was doing a master in environmental economics, but I was doing also a master in conducting because I'm a musician. I was at the at the University, Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and at the National University. I was doing a master in conducting. I used to play the French horn, and I was a conductor. I spent the first year doing both. After that, things got tough, and I know I need to go back to Haiti. I did not finish the other program, the music program. So, of course, I need to do something that will fit me. The economics was the main thing. I went back home. I spent 1 year and a half. And when I came to the US to study, I was lucky enough to get a Fulbright scholarship. I did not know English either, but the chance I got was if you don't speak English and the Fulbright commissions decide you're a good candidate, before you start your study, they make you come to the US 6 months before your program started to learn about English. American cultural leadership. So I came here in January 2009 at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. There was a program that was Spring International Language Center. I spent 6 months there to learn English before I moved to Yukon in August to start my program. But of course, sometimes it's still a challenge to move from one language to another. I forgot the Spanish for a while, but then I'm doing right now some consulting work for the Inter-American Development Bank. So I need to get back to my Spanish. You know, sometimes you mix it, and sometimes it's possible. I was talking to someone maybe in French, and someone else called me, and I have a tendency to continue the conversation in French or in Spanish or in the different language. Those things happen. But overall, I think it's fine, you know? Yeah, but sometimes you get the mix up. It's like you started from one conversation and you move. Yeah. But I think I've been lucky. I would say, yeah, I've been very lucky.
Thank you, Michée.
So, I was about to ask, Will, where did you learn French?
Oh, just as a child going back and forth, and doing years of schooling, and I felt like it was just a different, like you're inhabiting a different language and can have a different personality. And of course, academics is a bit like that with the different languages that Amelia was describing between health science and social science and so forth, and thought you might have some really good reflections, which you did. And so it's really great to hear your story of going, and then you even speak a fifth language of music, which is a very different thing.
Yeah.
You know, we have time for about one more question here, and I'm going to keep a short one, and it kind of piggybacks off of what just Michée shared. And all of our membership has very diverse interests as well. And I love learning about what side things people are interested in beyond just economics. So Michée shared about his French horn is conducting. Amelia and Richard, what kind of hobbies or outside interests, other things do you have that nobody might know about you, or only a few people might know about you outside of your academic world?
So yeah, that's a fun question. I bake a lot for the kids. This started during COVID. I was like, okay, we need something to get us up in the morning and get happy. So I'm going to make muffins. I'm going to make muffins almost every day. And so I'm still actually doing that. Probably like at least twice a week, different, flavors. I make them at night. I prep the wet and dry ingredients at night, and then I put them together in the morning. And so that's a pretty fun thing to do. And I can't seem to stop. So I just need something baked in the morning sometimes. What else? I like to do yarn crafts. I do crochet and cross stitch. My new cross stitch project is a caterpillar, like the very hungry caterpillar. And below it says "Eat the Rich," because I'm going to give that to a friend who's a really amazing activist. And I knit a lot of blankets. And so, yeah, that's basically it. I go on lots of walks too in town. And I try to get enough sleep.
Thanks, Amelia. Richard.
Yeah, so my wife and I are very involved on campus, so we get engaged with the students and activities here. We're also pretty involved at church. I've been learning Hebrew. I dabbled in woodworking briefly. It doesn't look like maybe I'm going to continue, but maybe we'll try. My wife also weaves tapestries, so that resonates with us. We like to go on hikes. So yeah, we travel to Ohio, visit family. Yeah, so thanks.
Okay, Michée, I don't want to not give you the opportunity here. So you have 4 languages and French horn and conducting. What else do you have in this unknown resume of skill?
No, I think that's all. I play soccer, yeah, but yeah, that's it, yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
I love soccer, yeah.
My son has entered soccer and I don't know anything about it. And it is a very healthy thing for me not to know anything about it. And it's been very joyful for us.
What do you mean it's very healthy for you not to know?
I'm a very competitive person. So for me to not know much about it is very good because I can't get too upset or, it's really good just to go enjoy his fun.
Okay,
I'm learning quickly though.
okay.
Well, I want to thank you three for taking your time today and sharing with us. For the sake of time and respecting your time today, we're going to end the session here right at the top of the hour. So thank you all for your time and for your contributions to the AAEA.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
for
It was a pleasure.
inviting me.
Nice
Nice
to
to
meet
meet
you.
all of
It was
you.
a pleasure.
Yeah.
Nice meeting all of you.